University, as well as Jim Kars, a speaker from our previous session, also from Queen's University. And I'd like to ask Debbie to take it away.
Actually, Jim, will you introduce yourself first?
Okay, if you weren't in the last session, I'm Jim Kars, the Director of the Project Portfolio Office at Queen's University. Previously, the QUASR Program Director, and a lot of our readiness assessment and the information that we developed on a framework for project readiness assessment was defined and developed during the QUASR project, working very closely with Debbie Radley, our HR project manager.
So my name is Debbie Radley, and I was the HR project manager for the HR payroll portion of the QUASR project. I've been with Queen's for 6 years now, and prior to that, I worked in the private sector. So I'm just going to go over an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to go over the objectives of a formal readiness assessment. We're going to talk about our specific project environment, which contributed in our situation to the need for a readiness assessment. We'll review the scope of that assessment, talk a little bit about how we incorporate it into our overall project planning. We'll go over some of the readiness confirmations and formal sign-off processes. Ours was particularly formal. Other institutions may choose to do that a little differently. And finally, I'll go over the benefits that were realized.
The objectives of a readiness assessment, first and foremost, is to promote engagement. It's more than, as we found out, more than just sharing information to others in terms of, is the system ready? Because we often didn't know. Well, we look at the different dimensions of readiness that we'll be talking about in terms of operational or support or project readiness. And what strategies did we use and employ to encourage that engagement, to get that participation that we needed during that particular phase of QUASR? And how did that help advance our leadership competence, and why was that important for us at the time? And it certainly was due to a lot of the management turnover that we had experienced. So some of the questions on engagement is who needs to be engaged, and we know it needs to be more than just a core project team on a project because of the different dimensions of readiness for the operational or production support. So it's more than just a project. And identifying those individuals that need to be engaged is critically important. And what strategies help encourage that engagement, and we'll go through in our presentation some approaches that we took to encourage engagement. And when is this degree of formality required? And we're not recommending or promoting that the readiness assessment framework that we utilized during this phase of QUASR is a template that needs to be utilized for all projects, but it is something that can be modified and used either formally, completely at 100%, or much less than that, depending on the specific needs of your project or the specific needs of your management and governance. And why is this verification often missed? Oftentimes we just run out of time on a project with due dates and deadlines, and short circuit and circumvent some of the verifications. And there is, as you'll see in our presentation, a significant investment in time and effort to achieve this, but the benefits far outweigh that time and effort. And how is this help leadership competence and readiness when the CIO or one of your vice principals or governance committee saying, are we ready? You can say, yeah, I think we are. Or you can demonstrate readiness with a very clearly defined approach, process, and sign-off documents.
All right, so I'm just going to speak a bit about our project environment specifically. So for those of you that weren't in the prior session that also touched on QUASR, I'll just briefly highlight the fact that QUASR stands for Queen's University Administrative Systems Replacement. So it was a significant initiative. We implemented 26 PeopleSoft modules. We decommissioned 23 legacy applications. It represented over 300,000 hours of effort. And it was a budget of $35 million. It was really a complete change in our technology for admin systems. It covered finance, student, and then HR and payroll. So this example, again, is specifically related to the HR and payroll implementation that went last. We experienced within the project some delays due to the complexity of our business processes and a constantly changing landscape. So originally HR and payroll was scheduled to launch in late 2010. We did not go live until February 2012, which is just over a year after that. So in considering that timing, we had to consider the student launch dates and the overall capacity of the stakeholders within the university to absorb that amount of change. Because you have to remember, some stakeholders within your HR or payroll community may also be a finance user or a student user. At the same time, there were, I think, at least five separate employee groups on campus who had become certified and were negotiating their first collective agreements, which, needless to say, created a lot of additional complexity that we had to understand. There was also some consideration about the HR department's capacity, and there was a need for some restructuring in that area as well. The wrong button. Leadership change. So in HR, leadership turnover was one factor definitely that made a strong case for the readiness assessment that we did. So we experienced 100% turnover in our senior project sponsors. So that really was a challenging time. It directly impacted the project's vision, momentum. There was a risk of the project stalling. We had to work really hard to maintain focus within our team. We had people rolling off and rolling on during 2011 while we were trying to keep that momentum going. And we also had to maintain the priority of our project at the leadership table as well, with new players.
Yeah, I just want to add before we, on the leadership change, we go back to that the change was often with our business owners, the decision makers. So a lot of the project work that, project decisions that we had to base work on were being questioned, sometimes changed. And so that increased the complexity of the project work itself. And Debbie, as project manager, did an excellent job working with the new leadership and her project team to maintain the focus on the end goal, what we were trying to accomplish. So it was during a very difficult time, but the leadership changes were one factor in terms of our need for a very formal project readiness assessment. Okay. And the quality assurance reviews, again, during the term of QUASR and the HR project where we implemented this, we had 19 separate external quality assurance reviews in that 40 months. We had about 16 different reports, direct reports to the Board of Trustees. And during just the HR payroll implementation, I worked closely with Debbie, we had 4 separate external reviews sponsored by our internal audit department and executed by a very large unnamed consulting firm, which created 4 separate reports, 120 some odd observations and findings that we needed to address. And as you can imagine, with the leadership changes that we just talked about and new leadership coming in, working with a prestigious consulting firm and having to address all these observations, it was fair for them to ask the question, are you ready? When we are ready to implement our HR payroll system, which would have, as you can imagine, a massive impact across campus. And so a lot of concern, hesitation, and the need for us to demonstrate that readiness in a very formal way, and that led to our framework.
Okay. So I'm just going to speak to the framework. So one of the lessons learned from the implementations that went before us was that not always, they addressed some of the dimensions required, but not all the dimensions. So what we set out to do was to address 3 key dimensions. So we looked at operational readiness, application readiness, and support readiness as the 3 main dimensions. So basically operational readiness was, have we communicated all the messages we need to communicate? Are the users understanding them? Are they prepared? Are the new business processes clear? For application readiness, I think that's probably the area that we'd all be most familiar with. You know, is the system working according to the requirements? Have we thoroughly tested and verified our conversions ready to go? Have they been verified? Is our cutover plan ready to go? And we went so far as to do almost like a mock cutover on over a series of a couple of days to also further demonstrate readiness for go live. We also had to, because these are business critical applications, we have one of our payrolls are bi-weekly. So we had to be ready immediately when we flipped that switch to run production payroll. So for support readiness, was just making sure that we had our support systems and resources prepared and ready to answer questions and to respond to any issues that we encountered. So, just talk this one through it. Okay, so, I don't know, has anyone seen this before? No? Okay. It may be a little dramatic, but we thought you might like it, and it really does represent what you end up with if you don't look at all the dimensions, right? Because at the end of the day, you're all in the same boat, right? Doesn't matter which leg of the stool falls off, it's still holding up the stool. So that's really, you know, emphasize the need to address all 3. And it's not just about the application. That was one of the big lessons that we learned.
And actually our official QUASR lessons learned report called out very clearly that we just were not ready for the business operations and in some cases the production support. The project may have been ready, the deliverables ready, the system operating as designed and configured, but if the business isn't ready to support that application. And so we learned a very, very strong, hard lesson, and there are many Queens individuals in this room now that lived through it with Debbie and I. That was critically important. And then on the production support readiness, what was some of the deficiencies that we had there is we actually changed the model, our production support model, to a consolidated PeopleSoft sustainment group, and we hadn't worked out all of the procedures and processes and responsibilities, and we had to make some assumptions on staffing levels and skill levels in different areas of PS admin and DBAs and business analysts. We did, and those were our best assumptions with what we knew at that point in time, but we need to react more quickly when we found out that those assumptions were not accurate.
Okay. So now onto the workflow plan. So ideally, if you're going to do something like this, you don't want to just think about it at the end, right? You want to build it into your project plan, because it really can all happen at the end. We used a process modeling tool called Industry Print, and it's a Deloitte proprietary tool. I'm not sure if it's still, I don't know if they're still using it. Anyway, and all of our deliverables were built off of those processes. So this is just one example of one of the documents we had that is sort of visual and illustrates how everything we did fed from those documents. So it wasn't just the development and testing of the technical side of the application, but it included things like change management, forms, security controls, training, and procedures. So I'm going to just focus in on the training example for a moment. We determined the training need. We developed a training strategy, training plan. We had to then go and develop our training materials, execute the training, and then monitor the training. And that's just a very high level kind of stepwise approach, but we'll go into them in a little more detail later on to just elaborate on how you can take some of those elements and use them to build engagement, and also, I guess, build in things that are measurable. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to not just think you're ready, you want to know you're ready. Okay. Go again.
Sure.
Okay, so the first document I'm just going to speak to for a moment is our transition readiness assessment document. So this had a project focus, and it was conducted approximately 6 months before our final readiness report. The categories in this document followed the project plan. So they covered the structure phase, configuration phase, testing, deployment phase, and they also contained each individual, we call them RICE objects. So each individual...
Excuse the interruption, everyone. We have a special person here who would just like to come say hi to all the Canada guests.
You just want to say hi, you know? Okay. All right. Well, good night. No, okay. I just did come over to say hi, and you know, just wondered if anybody ordered an Elvis and an alibi, you know. So you want to have a good look at me? Just, you know, go ahead, have a good look at me. That's it. I feel like Justin Bieber, actually. I don't know. So anyway, so listen, you look like you're what is this on the board here? It's pretty exciting. Man, when I was in high school, I don't know, what is that, man? I studied women in cars, that was it, you know. So, 1953 is a long time ago. So yeah, so people ask me, do you miss performing? And I say, really, I don't, because, you know, all that shaking and wiggling is pretty hard work, you know, so whatever. But I think it's lunchtime, so pretty good for me. So listen, hello, wonderful to be in Ottawa. It's been a long time. Even though it is raining, Kentucky rain. So have a good day, ladies and gentlemen, and take care, and until we meet again, may God bless you. Adios.
Okay.
We didn't know that.
I think it's appropriate, though. You know, I was talking about the constantly changing landscape.
Yeah.
That didn't faze me because of this.
Who was that?
Who was that? Okay, so I think I was talking about rice.
Yeah.
Okay. So that represents reports, interfaces, conversions, and enhancements, or customizations, or whatever you want to call them. So we had almost like this document almost became like a checklist of sorts, or a tool to measure, identify the most responsible individual for each of those items, and also assess in terms of readiness using the same sort of red, yellow, green approach. Okay.
And this particular report, I think, for just HR was about 70 pages.
Yes.
Yeah, it was pretty detailed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was detailed.
Yeah, and it also covered the cutover piece that we discussed, and also contingency planning.
Then the implementation readiness assessment, the final version, was really looking at all of the elements of operational support and project readiness. And let's go back to that one. Yeah, we'll talk about, we'll actually show some examples of the implementation readiness final version, and we use this to communicate to our governance and steering committee. So they didn't receive the 70-page report, they received this report, which had specific information on the 3 dimensions of readiness. There were actually about 22 different classifications of areas that we looked at. Okay.
Okay. I'm doing that one.
You do.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we, I think, learned a lot from this process. We had a lot of takeaways, but definitely it was a very useful process for us to go through. I have another addition. Let's skip over that one.
Then our business owner review.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were all clapping and happy, as you can imagine.
There we are. Found our spot.
And the actual sign-off documents, we had a sign-off document for each element of readiness. I think it zooms into that. And this is our training example where we worked directly with each one of the business owners and responsible individuals to craft the specific language for the sign-off documents. There were 17 different sign-off documents that we developed and worked, again, on the specific language with, although I remember working with George on one for security, but identified what we're signing off on, reference material that may be appropriate, milestones and accomplishments that had been completed and confirmed. And I think it pages down in terms of remaining effort required to go live and what's still outstanding. And does it need to be completed before you go live, or is it something that still needs to be completed and we're tracking post go live? So all of that information was reviewed, confirmed with each of the business owners, identified who needs to sign off on the documents. Some required 1 or 2 signatures. Some of the documents, if I remember, required 6 or 7. I can't think of one that required more than 6 or 7. The interesting part about the actual sign-off process is we went live, as Debbie indicated, in February. And we had all of the sign-off documents, or the vast majority of them, signed off in, I believe, the 1st or 2nd week in January. And this is just an indication of the environment that we had at the time. Our governance and executives, as we came closer to go live within a week and a half, required a re-sign off on every single document. And so there was enough concern at the time where we needed to take the documents and go back out and have all of the individuals that had signed them 3 weeks earlier re-sign those. And I only convey that because it was the environment that we were living at the time. Mm-hmm. And we had new leadership, new governance. We had a past history of a couple less than successful phases of the implementation in QUASR. So.
Yeah, there were definitely advantages to going last, and there were disadvantages to going last.
So the detailed review, and this is just a summary of the chart that we used in communicating readiness status to governance, and it listed the operational, the application readiness, operational, and sustainment readiness across these 22 different dimensions. This is actually the final version of it because you'll see everything's green. There's in the green cell, but along the way, we had some that were yellow, some that were red, and that it was communicated at that level of information to our executives and gave us focus in terms of the areas that we needed to address and confirm that we're truly ready, that we needed to ensure were completed so that we can get those sign-off documents and actually go live with the application. We were able to identify in these 22 areas 17 specific documents, and so we didn't have a direct correlation of one for one. We consolidated some into 17 different sign-off documents. And this is, in fact, the complete list of the sign-off documents. Again, the final version, and communicated on a regular basis to our executives and governance in terms of the sign-offs that were complete. And I think this is the one just before Al signed, number 17, which is actually this one. We made number 17 frameable, suitable for framing. And we had multiple copies so that we have an authorization, which is the final sign-off document to go live with the HR payroll application. And I believe Al has this in as well. So it's a little bit different format than the other ones, but we wanted one that was suitable for framing.
Okay. Actually, before we do that, I'm just going to go back and just make a few comments specific to training. So we've kind of used that as our example as we've gone through the presentation. So I mentioned earlier that I would elaborate on some of those demonstrable milestones that are measurable, and also how doing this can actually contribute to increased engagement. So for training, we had our training plan and our training strategy and plan signed off. And what that did is it got us down to the level of detail that was required. So we knew not only we were doing certain courses as instructor-led, but we knew we were having certain exercises, and we knew all of the components of that training. We had online simulations and quick guides that were completed and reviewed prior to being used in the classroom. And we actually held pilot sessions with our training materials. So what we did is we used our user acceptance testing, and what we did was we had jump start training. So we piloted the training materials at the beginning of the user acceptance testing as a way to get the testers off on the right foot, and so that's increasing their engagement. At the same time, we were demonstrating that these materials are viable. So that was just kind of an example, and then after that we delivered the real training. We tracked attendance in our sessions, so we knew the level of uptake. So we knew we had like 700 users we had to train. We would be able to report back to the leadership table how many have actually showed up for the training. We got their feedback from the training, so we could show the feedback to say people are appreciating the training. And it made all the difference. I mean, people would come up to me and say, I wish we had this kind of structure, when we were doing maybe some of the finance work, would have been helpful. So I think we were successful in sort of learning from the past and trying to improve on it. And finally, we only granted system access to the users who had completed their training. So that was another mechanism we could ensure that training was addressed. And another example of engagement, just really quickly, is we had some of those early adopters who were in those UAT sessions, and they actually came forward and volunteered to deliver some of the later sessions of our training. And I think that was an excellent example of engagement. If you see someone from the project team in front of the room telling you, click here, do this, that's okay. But if you have your colleague at the front of the room and they're doing it and they understand it, then you think, oh, you know what, I'm going to be able to do this too if that person can do it. So just those little things that made all the difference.
it wasn't just the UAT individuals, it was actually the business staff that about midway during training, and it was planned by design, would take over as primary delivery of the training, and the project team members would be there to support them. And so that helped, again, demonstrate their readiness, that they understand the application, can work with the application in production.
Okay, so we have a couple of quotes here. I'm not sure if we zoom in on them. No, we don't, so I'll just go back. So the first quote we have here is from Julie Makarsky. So she stepped in as the business lead for our project. And as you can see from her quote, she found it was very helpful in terms of ensuring there's a common understanding and agreement between the project team and the operational unit. And it also helped to ensure a smoother transition, because when you're operationalizing something of this size, it's really, the handoffs are kind of important, you know, when you hand it over to the business unit. The quote from Dawn is also true. You're never going to be as ready as you want to be, but I guess the framework, what the framework does is it helps to manage risk, identify it, acknowledge it, manage it, which is important. And Don was a really good example of engagement as well. He was not only the director of payroll and HRIS at Queen's, but he was also a member of our project team, which was really helpful. Okay, so we'll talk about the benefits. So, although, as you can tell, it required additional time, effort, patience, persistence, the benefits really do outweigh the costs. So first of all, we surfaced and managed our risks like I had previously mentioned. We learned from the prior project phases, and we overcame a lot of naysayers. We improved just overall confidence heading into our implementation. We definitely experienced increased levels of engagement. And as we could see, that helps with your transition. And finally, we definitely had increased levels of transparency and visibility. And we were able to ward off the rumor mill as much as you can. So you can separate like the fact from the fiction that swirls around.
Like prepay all your bills because you're not going to get paid next month.
Yeah. Okay, so in a way we made sure that we did everything in our power to be ready across all dimensions, and that means more than just the system being ready. And it was I just was having a little joke with Jim, but in all seriousness, we took it very seriously, especially with payroll and our parallels. It was serious business. And I think as a result of all of this, the transition for HR payroll was the smoothest of all of the go lives that we had as part of the QUASR program. Okay, oops, go back. So, I guess to sum up, we hope that this made a case for some sort of formal readiness assessment. Our environment definitely influenced what we did. So your institution may be different. And it may require completely different areas of focus depending on that environment. But maybe you can use this as a tool to build confidence in your risk areas. And
we have been asked by several prestigious high-priced consulting firms to provide this readiness assessment to them, and we have done so. So if you see it coming back, maybe in a paid engagement or something, at least you'll know the source and touch base with us, and we can share any other information or materials that you may need. Again, we want to thank you very much.
So if we have any questions from the room, I'm sure that Debbie and Jim will be pleased to answer them. There at the back.
I have a few questions, but I guess I'll start with the hard one. Why did you have so many external reviews? You said 4 external reviews for the implementation.
Right. So no, it was a result of the prior phases. So they had a particularly rocky finance implementation. HR, so payroll at Queen's represents 72% of the operating budget. So needless to say, it's a very important component of our administrative systems. Yeah, and it was also because I think Jim can probably go on.
Yeah, I can go on this one, but it's absolutely correct on the finance implementation and the degree of leadership turnover that we experienced. We literally had a complete changeover in our executive leadership from the top down. I don't think QUASR had anything to do with that, but it was during the term of QUASR and new individuals coming in, and rightfully so, because we did have a rocky first phase of the implementation, needed information, and we're asking all of the tough questions in terms of, do you know what you're doing? Are you doing it right? Are you ready?
The right people working on it.
Are the right people working on it? And so it was fair. It was fair, but very painful at the time.
Yeah, because you have a lot of one-on-one meetings with your sponsors, and you develop a relationship with those sponsors, and then they leave. You have to almost start over again, right? To rebuild those relationships and then rebuild that confidence. So that fed into it as well.
So now that you're a couple of years into your project, do you notice a difference between the components that you did this readiness for and the components that you didn't? Like, has it got a longer term effect than just the flip over and the real implementation? Like, do you see benefits?
Well, I'd like to be optimistic and say you can always recover, but yeah, I think we getting off on the right foot really makes a difference. I know, just resources in some of the other areas are really strained. It's really difficult, and it just helps you kind of get a bit ahead of the curve. I think. I
think the business owners would repeat that as well. That going through the formality of this process helped them get off on initially the right foot and work with the application, and they are working with it very well, extremely well, in the HR payroll and the other areas now as well.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't even had the same level of turnover. I mean, just as one example, maybe because that sort of managed through that difficult period. So it's helpful.
So now you've developed this process from your implementation. Are you going to use the same process when you go through your major upgrades on your ERP?
I'm saying that individual responsible for the upgrades with a definite yes over here. So Nancy is handling the PeopleSoft upgrade, and we're in intense planning with that, and certainly with any major project or implementation like a PeopleSoft upgrade or some others that are on our horizon, the assessment framework is clearly something that we'll need to demonstrate in terms of have you reviewed all elements of readiness before implementation with operational production support, not just the project itself.
And over time, the business units are going to be expecting it, familiar with it, comfortable with it, so it becomes part of the process, not the struggle that you had initially. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Do you have any idea how much time it added to your project to do this component of the work?
Well, not specifically, but it really rested on, we didn't
quantify it, but I would say during a 6-month period, 6 months before implementation with the full readiness assessment for the project, and about 3 months before we implemented, a fair amount of my time and some of Debbie's and some interns working very closely with the business owners that were needing and expected to sign off on different elements of readiness. Not only understanding what they're signing off on, but reviewing with them demonstrable proof, if they didn't already have it, that those elements were complete and ready.
We tried not to add any additional workload to the project team members. As a result of this, we tried to do checkpoints with them and make a minimal intrusion into their tasks.
And it was critically important that we could not go forward with an implementation where we had even one signature missing. And so some of the documents only required 2, some as many as 7, and there was, as you can understand, a reluctance on some individuals to sign off the documents if they didn't understand and know completely that they were in fact ready, that we were ready, that their business unit and their managers were ready, that their staff was trained, et cetera, et cetera.
You talked a bit about transparency. How transparent were you with business owners? What kind of tools did you use? Was it just email updates? Did you hold meetings?
Oh no, we had meetings. Yeah, definitely. Meetings, reports. We'd invite business leaders to our team meetings, and we would tell the team, don't sugarcoat stuff, like, this is just a regular meeting, so people, knew. And I think that, that's risky, but it's also, it helps with the understanding, because I don't think, there were some stakeholders in the university who thought, to implement payroll and HR, you just insert the CD and hit, runs the setup or something. It's like, no, this is actually a little more complex than that. So come on and you can come to the meeting and hear about it.
One concrete example of transparency, and I use this because we did go through several parallels, payroll processing. And during that process, we produced a schedule for the parallel, what we're going to accomplish each step along the way. We actually tracked and monitored that. An email was sent out by me to all of the stakeholders, not daily, but at least 2 or 3 times a week, on the exact status of what was accomplished. And so there are some key activities where there was complete transparency and a lot of interest in terms of, if you're running a parallel and is it producing the same result, and if not, and why is the data conversion taking so long, and it goes on and on.
Yeah.
So we did not run one parallel, we ran many.
Yeah, and it was important because it fed into that communication and transparency as well. Like, for instance, we had a tax calculation difference that was documented, understood, within the project team, and we wanted to get that message out to the VP of HR so that he knows about the some of the nuances between legacy and PeopleSoft. Just so everything goes smooth and there's they're not spooked or anything.
Yeah, there were 2 approved methods of tax calculation, and our legacy system used one, and PeopleSoft used another, but they produced a different result, but they're both approved.
Yeah.
So we have one last question, and then we're out of time. How long did it take for you to develop the framework?
Well, I think it started with the former VP of HR. And Jim as an idea, really. I think it came out of a meeting, and he came back, and it came together pretty quickly, I think.
It came together quickly, but evolved over the 4 or 5 month period leading up to the implementation, and it's pretty solid now in terms of something that we can use in its current form or a slightly modified form for other projects.
So thank you very much, Debbie Radley and Jim Karst from Queen's University. Thank you.